Hey, Maple Leafs fans, what is up? This is the Leafs Convo. I'm Norman James. Mike Augello is away today. He's covering the Toronto Marlies. Don't you worry, he'll be back. In the meantime, we have a special guest. My old friend from McKeen's and Roto World, Gus Katsaros, is standing by to drop his incredible hockey knowledge on us. We'll talk about the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs as they're currently unfolding right now and who he believes will go all the way to hoist Lord Stanley's mug later this spring. If it does turn out to be true, it further cements Gus's status as a genius. Plus, it'll make a lot of Canadian hockey fans really, really happy. Did the Leafs lose to the Bruins just because defensively they weren't up to snuff? Gus seems to think there's more to it than that. We'll get his take. Plus, Kyle Dubas. We believe he's going to be the next general manager of the Maple Leafs. It's only a matter of time, right? Can he keep Mark Hunter in the fold, and what will Dubas do to reshape the roster even ever so slightly to help the Leafs take that next step towards contentionhood and going all the way eventually to finally win that Stanley Cup? There's so much to talk about. Gus Katsaros is more than willing to do it. This is the Leafs Convo. Let's get started. And here is my friend, Gus Katsaros from McKeen's. Gus, nice to talk to you again. It's been a long time. Welcome to the reinvigorated version of the Leafs conversation that you used to be a part of all the time. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back.
So what's new with you other than watching hockey all the time? What do you think of the Lightning Bruins?
Well, I mean, after seeing what the Bruins did to the Leafs, it's pretty interesting to see how the Bolts are actually handling the type of game that the Bruins were able to bring in round one. So I find it to be pretty entertaining round two so far.
Would you say the Tampa Lightning are the next level up of what the Maple now and what they aspire to be?
Well, you know, the thing about the Leafs is, and I kind of got caught up in it as well. I mean, they're so talented, and they're in the stages right now where they're trying to still figure out who they are. Their identity is that of a young, skilled, very able and capable team, but there are definitely hurdles. Boston presented one of them. Mm-hmm. Tampa Bay is probably the model that they'd like to aspire to, considering the talent that they have up front. But the blue line is where they differ dramatically. And the blue line, I think, is doing a much better effort against the Bruins than the Leafs have. So I think that while the Leafs aspire to be kind of what Tampa Bay might be in terms of perennial potential contenders almost on an annual basis, the Leafs still have a ways to go in order to get to that particular stage.
This is the Leafs Conversation. Norman James without Mike Augello, who's doing yeoman's work somewhere. I don't know. He might be digging graves. He might be getting ready for the Marlies and the Crunch. This is Gus Katsaros from McKeen's Hockey Pool Yearbook and Roto World joining me again. Gus and I go way back with the hook on AM 980 years ago, and of course the Leafs Convo and the Convo through my old place of work, CTV London. It was a blast with you then. It's a blast with you now. How does Let me stop before we get into the Kyle Dubas, Mark Hunter, and the GM situation with the Leafs right now. But what was being heard from the fan base ad nauseum leading up to the playoffs, but especially during the playoffs, games 1 and 2, when the Leafs got clobbered, and then anytime the Leafs were having public deficiencies in the defensive end, trying to withstand the Boston onslaught. The narrative, the kind of the squawk box that you'd hear from fans was, look, this team needs a revamped defense. Jake Gardiner's got to be out of there. He's a one trick pony from the blue line. This team needs a better stay at home kind of defenseman and commander back there. Was that glaring to you? Do you share that same assessment, or is it deeper than that?
The blue line is clearly a problem, but I don't tend to agree with that. I think that the Leafs in general did a terrible defensive job. It's not just on the blue line. And, you know, we need to reconfigure what we consider defense. Defense isn't about shots and net and goals allowed and all that stuff. It's about getting the puck back. So we could take Toronto's defensive blue line. The reason why they had all that pressure is because they were just a one-and-done team. They would get into Boston 10, Boston would get it out, and now they have to keep defending. And not understanding and not being able to match Boston in the type of physicality and the way that Boston was able to get pucks back after they take an initial shot or shot attempt. The Leafs went into a bit more of a passive prevent style defense. So tactically, using system and structure, the Leafs need to be better. They need an upgrade on the blue line, but every team needs an upgrade on the blue line. They just need players that are able to understand the vision and the scope of what they're trying to do defensively. They're not trying to limit shots. They're trying to get the puck back. They weren't able to do that in round one. Boston kept coming with pressure and more pressure and more pressure, and this is how it ended. Why do you think Jake Gardiner took the brunt of the criticism? I mean, people were mean to him. I mean, he had a catastrophic Game 7, but the guy was out there trying his ass off. He may have made some plays that he'd like to take back, but in the heat of the moment and without a lot of support, what's the guy supposed to do? Well, I think that he takes the heat because most people think and look at the mistakes that he made that initially began I guess the counters or the onslaught from the Bruins. But the reality was the Leafs should never have even been in Game 7. Tuukka Rask was so bad. He allowed so many goals on a little amount of shots that it gave the Leafs the opportunity to still stay in the game. It's not like they were overpowering. It's not like they were better. And it's not like Boston was reeling from anything Toronto did. They just happened to need more goals because their goaltender was bad. Now, Jake Gardiner makes a couple of really glaring mistakes, and people don't see the big picture. They don't understand exactly what's really going on in terms of how this game is being played, and they look for those particular moments to cast blame. Gardiner is an easy target, and I understand it from a fan's level, from the frustration that they've probably seen. They see the same kind of mistakes Gardiner does over and over and over and over. And to that point, I mean, he's a veteran at this point. He's not a rookie. There's no more upside to Gardiner. This is what he is. So you either accept these mistakes knowing that he can make up for them using the modern game and mobility and getting pucks to the net and skating it up ice and doing the things that a modern age defenseman does. And you have to accept that at some point in time, it's not just Gardiner's mistakes. There needs to be an element of support. And the Leafs have to do that at a team level more so than an individual player level. I hate the fact that he's getting blamed specifically for that game, but I can understand why people tend to look at those glaring mistakes as the reason as to why the Leafs didn't make it to the next round. Look, the Leafs should have scored 8 goals if they wanted to win that game. This is the Leafs Conversation. I'm Norman James, discussing hockey with my good friend Gus Katsaros from McKean's Roto World. He does incredible work breaking down the game for us on social media, putting it into layman's terms with a very intelligent context. Thank you so much for doing what you do, Gus. So the Leafs need to play a better defensive team game if they want to take that next step. They need to be able to implement some kind of a support structure that will allow them. And, you know, it's interesting. I say that from an element of coaching and saying that the coaches have to implement something, but the players themselves too. And let's take a practical example. You look at the forward line, the first group, the first unit, Austin Matthews, Jack Hyman, and William Nylander. They were clearly not getting the job done. Why? Because they were one and done. They would get into Boston's zone, take a shot, and Boston would get it out. So what did the coaching staff do to make that kind of a change, to see if they can actually enhance what that first line is doing? They took William Nylander off, who was really not performing very well. And I understand that from the coaching perspective. And they put in Connor Brown. They could have put any other player. They could have put Barry Kapanen. They could have moved Johnson up. Instead, what they did was they put a grinder up at that first line. So now you have an immensely skilled center with 2 less skilled players. But what do? Get the puck back. Those are the players that are going to, after Matthews takes his initial shot and somebody has to go into the corner to get the puck back, it's not going to be Nylander. It's not going to be somebody that plays a skilled game. You need to be able to have those players that, while they do exhibit the skill required in today's NHL, can do a little bit more. They need to be able to be intelligently physical. They need to be able to use those skills to get the damn puck back, get to the hands of the skilled players, and capitalize. They clearly were not able to do that for every line all the way through, and it was the defense that had to suffer because of that. They rely so much on Anderson because of not being able to get the puck back. And I really harp on that point because it's the most important element that really cost the Leafs a second round.
Gus, do the Leafs, as of right now, have the proper personnel to execute the strategy to move the team collectively forward? And or is the coaching staff, did the coaching staff make the right decisions? And if not, can they correct the decisions that they made in order to jive better with the personnel that they have at their disposal?
Well, I mean, the best thing that actually could have happened is exactly what happened. They got a little bit of their heads knocked. The coaching staff learned their lessons as to what they have in terms of assets on the ice, how to manipulate and use those assets. If there are deficiencies in their mindset, then they need to replace the players that they feel aren't performing to the same degree that will require them to reach that next level of success. I think that for the most part, there's enough balance and there's enough grit up front to be able to play that style of game. They're going to have to change it a little bit. We can go back a couple of years. Ever since Babcock came into Toronto, the Leafs were aggressive in the offensive zone. They played a very aggressive 2-1-2, two forwards in, a support player in the middle, and two guys that are ready to step up if need be. And this year they took a step back. They went into what is a 1-2-2, which is one guy in, two guys in support, and two guys on the defense. That leads to a bit more of a passive stance. The aggressiveness was gone. So if you're going to play that kind of more passive, less aggressive forechecking style, you need to be able to get players that are able to play in that support role. And the Leafs didn't really have that. So while they have a nice, very good and skilled element up front, it's not good enough to be able to just create one opportunity and then hope you get the puck back when it comes back the other way. You need to be able to play a little bit more, generate more zone time to be able to get more shot attempts. They need to change a little bit of the personnel in order to do that.
There's some modification that's going to have to take place over the months ahead. The question is who spearheads that modification, Kyle Dubas or Mark Hunter? Are you in the Dubas camp? Are you in the Hunter camp? Are you in the camp that I currently situate myself in, hoping that Mark Hunter can be convinced to stay aboard, to continue to do his thing, reporting to Kyle Dubas?
The inner workings and the politics that are involved in hockey overall is probably something that I really shouldn't be commenting on. If it was something that I really had to make a clear and distinct decision on, I think that Dubas has been groomed to be in that position.
Sure.
At the same time, you bring in guys like Hunter because what kind of a mentor is that? Like, we're talking about one of the greatest, I should say one of the most celebrated GMs in OHL history, a legendary franchise, a consistent, hardworking. Like, there are things that Mark Hunter displays that Dubas can learn from. Can get along. There could be an element of ego because of age. I think that in essence, they are the same type of person. They are both hockey guys. One guy approaches it using column A. The other guy approaches it using column B. Together, the overall vision should be very symbiotic, meaning they play off each other. And I'm fine whether or not they pick Hunter or Dubas as the GM. I think that they'll be fine either way. I like the direction of analytics. I like the fact that you can use more information in order to develop certain things and change the way that we see the game. I think that the game is changing so dramatically that we do need that infusion of data. But who's to say that Mark Hunter isn't part of that either? It's like you can't build the London Knights into being what they are without infusing some data and some newer techniques into it.
Gus, when the OHL, David Branch wanted to push away from the physical aspects, the fighting, the violence in OHL hockey, 8-10 years ago, the team to on the fore of that movement, on the fore of that evolution of the game, the London Knights. Look at the Rupert brothers. Look at Mitch Marner. Brandon Truss was a tough guy, but the Hunters were all about giving the little player that could or can the opportunity. It wasn't necessarily about the brute Western Canadian kind of strength and force and, just initiate your will to win the game. It was really just about bringing in hard workers with skill and talent. And that was typified or represented by the teams that they've been so successful with over the years. And even when Mark stepped away from the London Knights to help out with the Maple Leafs, look, he was in Rob Simpson's ear. He was in Basil McRae's ear. I mean, he owns the team, and he has a lot of passion for what the London Knights stand for. And they won they dominated the Red Deer Memorial Cup with nothing but skill. And they went all the way to the Memorial Cup final in Shawinigan with tons of skill. And again, I think the problem here is that there's a bit of laziness in the way we the way we cast sort of aspersions, or we assume a player, or sorry, a hockey person, because they're older, is a tie to the old school. And this is the argument that I was getting into with a lot of people, Dubas versus Hunter. I was never against Dubas. I like the guy. I told you, it goes back to the Hook days, right? Just like you. Fantastic guy. I want to see him succeed. Grew him for the position. But let's stop juxtaposing what he's about with what we think Mark Hunter stands for. And let's realize they have a lot of similarities. And even though Mark Hunter might seem like he's from the old school, he was pushing forward a smarter, sharper, more offensive, more talent-based ideology in a game that was, slow to move out of an old school way of brute force thinking, if you know what I'm getting at.
Him and Dubas come from an element where they seem to be able to implement progressive ideas into a solid hockey mentality, not necessarily an old school. We're not talking about Neanderthal stuff, and we're not talking about, I guess, old ideas. They're able to implement the new way of playing the game and apply that to every level that they're, I guess, following, whether that's at the NHL pro or developmental level.
Gus Katsaros from McKean's Roto World joining us on the Leafs Conversation. Norman James, Mike Augello covering the Toronto Marlies. We will reconvene with him in the days to come. So assuming Kyle Dubas takes over the post as Maple Leafs general manager, what a job for a guy like that to have in his early 30s, running the biggest hockey team in the world, a team with high expectations on it. What can he do almost immediately to impact the roster in a way that will indicate that the Leafs are taking that next step forward?
Well, I mean, I don't think that there's very much to do other than address some very specific things that we just discussed over their performance in the first round of the playoffs, add something that will be able to help them get the puck back. I think that there's a lot of talent in the depths. The Marlies are a good indication of just where the Leafs are able to find some burgeoning talent. So, I'd actually just say stay the course.
Yeah.
Do what you're doing. Keep bringing in talent. Keep promoting skill. Augment that skill with players, whether that's through free agency or sheer good moves, good trades. I'm not too concerned about this whole skilled versus non-skilled. I think if you're playing in the NHL, there is some value to you. It's up to coaching staff to extract that value. If they're not able to, then you find another team. So I think Kyle understands, or Mark Hunter understands, that they still need to be able to keep consistently bringing in skilled players and then augment that skill with acquisitions.
So essentially, forget about importing anybody. Just buy local, right? From your own farm, south of the Gardiner.
Hey, man, these guys, they know. They've been in the game long enough to understand what is actually out there. And they probably have enough contacts between them to be able to get the information they require. That's a big key, too. Being able to just pick up the phone and get a report on someone or a piece of information is pretty important. Like there's we don't get just from looking in the outside and think, okay, well, we can make a decision based on these factors. But when I can pick up the phone and get even more detailed and intimate information, that definitely makes my job a lot easier.
You got to think, working amongst the hockey operations for a team as large and as important as the Maple Leafs, it's not a democracy, but it's not a dictatorship either. You need an exchange of ideas, exchange of information, and you need people who are expert in their abilities to hone in on specific departments while your de facto leader answers to the media and does daily debriefings and, adds his 2 cents. I mean, this is a by committee thing, right? If you want to run a successful organization and win championships, I mean, the buck does stop, say with Brendan Shanahan at the end of the day, but you need a lot of hands on deck.
There's a lot of things that have made me understand how management seems to work a little bit differently now in the NHL as it has in the past. But an example, kind of to your point, the Leafs brought in Jacques Lemaire as a special consultant. Why would Babcock need somebody to actually have some kind of a consultancy in order. That's because he provides a skill set that was more in tune to coaching that is now going to, I think, at some point in time, start to replace professional scouting. So going back to the idea of getting the best information, if Mike Babcock, one of the best coaches in the world, is still getting input from one of the oldest coaches in the world, then why can't Dubas or Hunter use that same network, that same framework to be able to do their own jobs?
Gus Katsaros from McKean's Roto World, Norman James. This is the Leafs Conversation on our YouTube page. Thank you so much for all the support. Just come back to it, listen, leave a comment, keep coming back, keep refreshing, keep checking for more content. We are going to fill that space up over the summer months leading up to when the Leafs drop the puck on their very next season. So thank you very much for your support. We appreciate it very much. Before we let you go, Gus, Mike Augello, we love the guy. He does terrific work. We've conversed with him, discussed hockey with him for years, almost over a decade now. He's right there, and he's a guy who's ascended from Mike in Buffalo calling into Leafs Talk with Andy Frost to a Hockey Buzz, writing stories for Sporting News. He's an accredited member of the digital media, going to Leafs games. So it's been nice to watch his rise from where he started to where he is now, and potentially be excited for where he may be going forward. And the good thing is he brings us a perspective, Mike. Gus. He brings us a perspective. And one of the perspectives that he has, it seems to me that it could create for, I don't know so much, it might be tension, but there may be a bit of a obstruction here going forward with any sort of a Dubas Babcock relationship. And I'm just speculating. But if Mike Babcock, he's the 800-pound gorilla. I mean, he's the highest paid guy on the team, in the organization. How is Kyle Dubas going to be working at the pleasure of the head coach? And if not, how does that change Mike Babcock's stature within that organization? Forget about how much he's making. Is Babcock the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and Dubas is serving at his pleasure? Or do you think that Babcock will be able to modify his understanding of where he sits on the food chain and work with how Dubas wants to lay things out?
Well, I think both of them, in terms of having a relationship, should understand that each role is for the benefit of the team. And they're trying to make the team either better, more competitive, whatever the case is. There should be a symbiotic relationship there. And if Babcock is making an ask, then Dubas needs to understand why that ask is coming. Is it feasible? Can we do it? And there needs to be a dialogue. As long as there's a dialogue between both of them, I have no problems with the way that they work together. If Babcock is asking for something, and he's asking for it for a specific reason that he can justify, and Dubas is able to, come through with it, then I don't see that being a problem at all.
If Mike Babcock wants to be immortalized as the Stanley Cup winning head coach for the Maple Leafs after they've ended their drought, he can't be a cranky old coot. And he's not that way anyway. And we stipulate, we speculate, we wonder, we throw out all sorts of theories, but we just never know. However, a lot of how we look at things is a result of the end result, and that was not necessarily a great way for the team to go out. Last thing for you, do the Leafs do anything in free agency? Do they spend some money? Is John Tavares, should we not even think about that guy? I mean, would he not be a redundant quality on a team that's already offensively gifted?
No, I'd be all in on Tavares if that was the case.
Sure.
You could be you could put him right into the lineup and really create a very difficult situation for your opponents. I think at the same time, kind of going back to our earlier conversation, they could probably augment their blue line a little bit. I think if they're going to delve into free agency, Tavares would be my number one choice. And if they really wanted to just do something for the sake of doing something, probably just trying to bring something from a defensive perspective.
Do you think Tavares would entertain coming to Toronto? I've heard that he would want no part of Toronto. I don't know why. What do you think?
I couldn't tell you. I from my understanding, if he was able to bring a championship here to what would be his hometown, that could definitely be a plus. But I mean, it kind of depends on his specific situation. I don't think money or term is really a big issue. I think championships really do matter to him. And if it does, the Leafs would probably be in a better situation than the Islanders. But there are other teams out there that could potentially make a better pitch. So it's just a matter of listening to his options, I think.
This might sound like a dumb question, but
say Nylander was still on this roster with the Tavares, with Marner, with Matthews, with Kadri, is there enough puck to go around?
I think so. I think that's a coaching thing. Coaches have to be able to figure out whether or not certain combinations on the ice work or not, and if they don't, then change it up. They used to say the same thing about Solani and Korea moving into Colorado, I recall. But, there might just only be one puck, but both of those players are threats. Yeah. And players on the opposition have to react to those threats. And that's how you play the game.
I should let you go, Gus, but you know how much I love you. You know how much I respect your hockey knowledge, and I'm just a sponge right now. One more for you. Who wins the Stanley Cup? Winnipeg Jets?
I like the Jets. I think I'm going to go all in with them. I'd like to actually see Vegas do it just for the sheer audacity of it all, but I think Winnipeg is the winner there.
Wouldn't that be something, eh?
Would love it.
The pursuit of a Canadian Stanley Cup champion. After 1993, it's been so long, waiting on these 6 franchises that are in the league year after year, never able to do it. Montreal came close. Vancouver came close. The Jets get their team back, and they pull it off in 2018. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing, Gus?
What a story that would be, eh?
We'll talk to you soon, okay? Thank you so much, McKean's Roto World. You do so much great stuff for us. At Cats Hockey. Thanks, Gus.
The pleasure's mine, Norman. It's always been great talking to you from the hook all the way up to here.
We'll do more later.
Bye.
Gus Katsaros, you got to love that guy. He's just so smart, so classy, so articulate, and he explains the game incredibly well. Whether you're a high-level hockey fan who wants to get in-depth or just the layman who's trying to learn more each and every time you watch the game or converse with somebody like Katz, he is going to be there for you, and he is going to help you learn what you need to know in that particular setting. At Cats Hockey on Twitter. Go follow him. You'll be glad that you did. Mike Augello will return for our next podcast. In the meantime, he is continuing to cover the Toronto Marlies, who I believe not only need to beat the Crunch, but go all the way and win the Calder Cup. A nice send-off for their current general manager, who is going to eventually take the reins of the Toronto Maple Leafs. As Gus Katsaros mentioned just a few minutes ago, Kyle Dubas, from the time he was hired by the Maple Leafs, essentially groomed to become the general manager of the Maple Leafs, and that time is nearing. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube page. While you're there, leave a comment. Good, bad, or ugly. We're just talking hockey. We need your support. For Mike Augello, Gus Katsaros, I'm Norman James. Thank you so much for listening to the Leafs Convo. We'll talk to you next time.